led to his conversion? And I'm talking about from Protestantism to Catholicism. That's something that I think a lot of evangelicals have a tendency to kind of a bit of the question mark comes up. What do we do with him because of that?
Sure.
But what really led to that? Was it an intellectual? Was it a awakening? Was it a combination? What was it?
So, I think with Chesterton, you have to talk about two conversions, because his sort of conversion out of a deep, dark pit of despair in the 1890s and to sort of basically mere Christian orthodoxy, a sort of high Anglican ism. That's what starts first. So that happens, around the turn of the century. He basically becomes an apologist. At some level, he begins to argue for the existence of God. And then orthodoxy is in some ways his sort of his coming out as a Christian book, where he's basically saying, I agree with the basic essentials of Christianity. But and he even mentions in orthodoxy, he's not talking about the seat of authority, so to speak. So he's not answering the question about Anglicanism versus Catholicism or whatnot. That comes out in 1908. Chesterton actually converts in 1922 and probably would have converted. So it's 100 years ago this year, probably would have converted earlier had it not been for his wife, Frances, who was very devoutly Anglican. Chesterton's reasons for converting to Catholicism are really interesting. He writes about them in a lot of different places. There's when you read him as a Protestant, Chesterton was a journalist first and foremost, not a theologian. So he's not someone you really go to for theology as much as you go for his sort of take on the world. But as a theologian myself, reading him, I find a lot. Some places he's extraordinarily helpful, and then other places he's just completely off base. There's aspects of Puritanism that he gets right, critiques and whatnot. There's aspects of Calvinism critique that he gets right. Then there's aspects that I think he's really not read enough there, or hasn't actually gotten to the root of some of the reasons why, for example, in our day, someone like a John Piper, who is as Calvinistic as they come, loves G.K. Chesterton. It's almost like he realizes, Gilbert just doesn't really get the fact that same sort of sacred intoxication of existence is actually at the root of that gratitude for existence and salvation you can get in Reformed theology as well. Chesterton's reasons for converting, he would say very simply, well, I converted to have my sins forgiven, because he basically saw the church as providing the assurance of sins through confession, through the sacramental system and whatnot. But it's interesting. You read him, one of the reasons, or one of the things that pushes him towards Catholicism and away from Anglicanism, is that he really didn't believe Anglicans were acting like a church, like in the sense of there was all that conversation around the time about divorce, loosening restrictions on divorce and remarriage, and then also around birth control at the time as well. And so all of these things that basically he looks at Anglicanism, and then you have people that are, Anglican bishops and whatnot, kind of dancing around things like the virgin birth or the reality of miracles and whatnot. And so Chesterton is watching that sort of preceding the fundamentalist and modernist controversies that were beginning to happen in the US at the time. And I think his take was, he wants not a church that will move with the world, but a church that will move the world. And so Anglicanism begins to lose its luster as that church, and Catholicism at the time begins to really shine as that kind of church that's going to sort of resist the tides of modernity and things like that. And so that's part of that push from Chesterton from Anglicanism into Catholicism. And for reasons that even I myself would be sympathetic to in a lot of ways, although I wonder what Chesterton would say now about, just some of the ways that the Catholic Church has developed and how the Second Vatican Council has been used in Catholic circles, the spirit of Vatican II to push through a lot of different things that would have probably been somewhat appalling to Chesterton in some ways 100 years ago, or some of the discussions even now among some of the German bishops and whatnot. So as someone who follows Roman Catholic development from afar with an appreciation, I think, for some of their public theology and their sort of Christian social teaching, it is interesting I do wonder at times what Chesterton would say today about the Catholic Church, or even if he would even say what would he say today about Catholicism, what he said 100 years ago about Anglicanism. I mean, it's just interesting to think about what that might look like, or what his take would be on some of those current controversies in the Catholic Church.